Okay, well, today we're going to look at the worldview of postmodernism, and I've got to explain why this is considered a worldview and not just a philosophy. Now, David Noble, who wrote the book Understanding the Times, has studied worldviews most of his life, and of course, his book is probably the best in the world you're going to get. And I said, David, why is postmodernism in there as well as Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism? He said, postmodernists have writings in those 10 areas. So he said a worldview has authors and authorities and books and writings that attempt to paint a comprehensive picture of life. So not only does Marxism have writings in economics and law and history, but so does postmodernists. So he said because of that, he said, we're going to see it as a comprehensive worldview. Whereas if you look at animism, there's a lot of animists in Australia, the Aborigines, we got animists here, but they don't have any writings. They don't have a political science vision. They don't have a definition of economics. They don't have a description of the origin of the universe necessarily. They're kind of a philosophical lifestyle. They're not a comprehensive worldview. So that's why we are only covering these 6. All right, so postmodernism has authors in all those 10 areas we've been covering. So it is a worldview, and we're going to see that it comes from atheism. We've studied secular humanism. We've looked at Marxism, and this is the third atheist variety. So they have ideas that parallel some secular humanist ideas. They have some ideas that parallel the Marxists. Such as cancel culture, that sort of thing, but they also have some differences. So it's important to look at this, and it's pretty comprehensive in their writings. But you will see that a lot of our world today, in 2021, is affected by this worldview. And so many of the social, political movements come out of this. So if you understand this worldview, you will understand a lot of what cancel culture and white privilege and Black Lives Matter and all these movements are coming from. And of course, the Marxists love it because they're right in there to undermine the West and its resolve. And so it's significant. And so let's take a look at it. Okay, we need to understand the origin of postmodernism by looking at pre-modernism. So pre-modernism was a period before the 1600s when religion was the source of truth. People took authority from the Bible. The church played a central role in society. The modern era is considered between 1600s and 1960s. Reason and science were now the source of truth. Truth became, well, truth was recognized, didn't become. Truth was recognized as being objective. It matched reality. So if somebody said water boils at 100 degrees centigrade, it would. So the truth was that water boils at 100 degrees centigrade. So truth was understood to be objective, and we could learn it. We could know what it was. There was a skepticism of the supernatural, however. People became dominated by reason. The aim was to discover the big picture about the world. Let's get a big grand theory of how it all works. And evolution certainly has played a major part in there, because we know that Hitler and others used Darwin's theories to build their empires, to justify their slaughtering of other people they considered inferior. And there was a belief, however, that we could progress. And so I don't know the date again of when men landed on the moon, but that was part of the era. I think it was the 60s. Was it 68? Anyway, postmodern is 1960 onwards. And in this era, which we're still in, there are skepticism about any claim to people knowing something, like I know that God is real. I know that the Bible is true. I know that Jesus rose from the dead. Any kind of big claim like that, there's skeptics about this. The source of truth has become the community consensus. So the LGBTQ, they have their truth. Black Lives Matter, they got their truths. Native Australian Aborigines, they have their truth. We need to learn everybody other's truths and don't tell them that we have the truth. So there was a big rejection of any authority that claimed to have the big story. So Christianity was out, Islam's out. Any big story about how the world works was out. And this idea of progress became another questionable thing. Reality became unknowable, and truth and reality were considered to be social constructs. So this means that truth is something you create out of your own experience. Everybody said, you know, my truth is not your truth. You've heard that, right? Or everybody has their own reality. Well, that's part of this whole thing. So that has really become the foundation of a lot of these movements in the West that are just tearing apart definitions of marriage, family, truth, creation, everything. And this is a huge influence. I'm just going to list some of the brief main features, and don't forget, you can get the video, so you don't need to take notes. This is listing a few things just to get a feel for the beginning of this talk. In philosophy, which is the question of what's real, how do I, what's truth, there is the philosophy there of anti-realism. Reality is a social construct. In literature, the movement is to deconstruct every text. There's no objective meaning in any text. So just consider this. What does the Bible mean? They go, well, the Bible was written a long time ago by people who didn't have the knowledge. The book of Genesis was written by somebody who had no scientific knowledge like we have today. Therefore, these books have no meaning for today. So you can imagine, okay? There's no objective Jesus who rose from the dead. That's your truth. That's not their truth. So this is huge because it means all books can be read and decided, the meaning decided by the reader. So if you're studying Shakespeare, they don't want to look at him because he's a white male who's now dead. So his writings are biased and privileged, and we need to now just read Black authors to get their truths. So deconstructing any book is being done at every university in the West on the basis that the author's a white guy, he doesn't know anything about Blacks, he's never lived in the shoes of a Native American, so we have to rewrite those books from those perspectives. History becomes anti-meta narrative. The Bible gives us a picture of all of life, so does Islam, but they don't believe in any big picture. There's no direction we can map out or explain. In sociology, which is the area of the family or society, it's multiculturalism because all societies are equally valid. So we white people have ruined the Aboriginal Australians with our residential schools. And that's what they teach here too. Our residential schools were white people and Catholic domination of Native peoples, and we've ruined them. These peoples have equally valid stories to the West, and the West is guilty of colonialism. So, you know, they lump in all that and they want to elevate these cultures. And I work in a school district here, and right now, right coming down from the government is the mandate from our provincial government to indigenize the entire curriculum. And I asked a question about that one time. I said, what does that mean? How are we going to indigenize math? You know, I mean, they haven't even worked it out yet, but that's the push to promote other cultures as not only equally important, but more important now that we white people have ruined the world, sort of thing. You know, so multiculturalism is huge. Politics, political correctness absolutely dominates. Politics is reduced to people using power. That's why the term white privilege has come up. White people have all the power. We need to redistribute the power. We need to take power away from the police. We need to, ban police so that people can be free. I mean, you got some nutty responses here. And the arts are just pointless. Nihilism. Life is fragmented without purpose. So you're not going to see a Picasso or a Van Gogh or Rembrandt. So these are just some of the overarching ideas. But let's look in specifics. In theology, the question of God, postmodernism is based on atheism. They believe in the death of God. It's also believed, it's based also in religious pluralism. If there is religions, the conviction that we should be tolerant of all religious beliefs, because no religion is really true. They're just nice beliefs. And we have this view of the emergent church, which is happening in Christianity, a new movement that's incorporating elements of postmodernism within their theology. Some of these are the denial of biblical inerrancy. This is huge. The Bible can't be trusted. The Bible's full of errors. It's not inerrant. It was written by humans. It's fallible. It's corrupt, whatever. They have skepticism in these churches that are following the emergent church idea of the foundations of knowledge. They don't have an orthodoxy or a religious practice that's traditional, but it's liberal. So there's a church near us here, for example, that has a pastor who has a live-in girlfriend. He's not married, and this is part of this church, and they have all kinds of other beliefs. So they have an orthodoxy that's definitely not biblical conservative. And they believe in the subjectivity of language. So that means that the Bible doesn't mean what you think it means. That's happening within the church. Okay, in the area of philosophy, we've said this already, anti-realism, that reality is subjectively constructed by human thought. There's no real world out there. You construct the world according to your culture. Your culture decides what's real and true. And so we got to bring all these cultures to the forefront, and the white people have to take a back seat because we're colonialists, we're white privileged, we have done great evil, and we've squashed all these beautiful cultures, these animists, these aboriginals, these native Canadians, etc. We've got to lift them all up. And there's no universal truth. Truths are particular to societies, cultures, and groups. And there's no correspondence theory of truth. And that theory is this, that truth, if something's true, it must correspond to reality. So if I say water boils at 212 Fahrenheit or 100 degrees centigrade, I should be able to show that. And you can. So that is the truth. But they've thrown this theory out, that if something's true, we need facts for it. For them, something can be true, but you don't need facts. What they're relying on, you're going to see, is feelings. People want their feelings to be the determinant of what's true. So you hear a lot of people today, I heard in my workplace, well, I really feel this about that, rather than, well, I think this. They don't think, they feel. So we're moving into a real subjective assessment of what truth is. In philosophy, written or verbal statements can only reflect particular culture or an individual's point of view. So if you're reading Shakespeare, you say, well, that was his cultural time. That was his point of view. Or any document, the Bible. Well, that was written a long time ago. That's their point of view, and we have ours, and we're changed. And so we can't, we don't need to follow anything Jesus said. So language is the socially constructed order in which we live. So words have become hugely powerful. And that's why all the definitions are being changed of words like marriage, like equality. We've got words that have suddenly become so important, like inclusive, tolerant, diversity. All these words suddenly, racism, are all out there, powerfully altering laws and politics. It's unbelievable how quick this has happened. So you got to watch language. The words are being altered to be given new meanings. And you just think of the word gay. You almost can't use the word gay anymore because it has a totally new meaning. And so words like equality mean something completely different. You need to ask people now, what do you mean by that? Because they may have a postmodernist interpretation. There's no meta narratives. And by the way, I won't be able to take questions yet. I see somebody's raised their hand, but for the sake of the video, we're just going to go through. And then if you have questions during the break, I'll answer questions then. No meta narratives means that there's no arching interpretation of reality. Postmodernists insist that there's no universal truth. Truth is what a community allows each member to say that's true. But then, here's what I say, but then they insist that atheism's true, right? So if there's no interpretation of reality, how can they say atheism's true? How can skepticism be true? How can relativism be true all the way around the world? So, and if there's no big story, then how can postmodernism itself be true, which is trying to give you a big story? See the contradiction here? So as Christians, we want to be able to we want to be able to understand what they're saying and counter it and challenge it, show inconsistency. In philosophy, the idea of deconstruction promoted by Jacques Derrida is a means to criticize the text, and it considers a text open to the reader's interpretation and full of hidden bias, assumptions, and prejudices. So every book, every writing is biased, has hidden assumptions and prejudices, and the reader has to determine what's true. The reader has to deconstruct the text to find the real meaning. But then again, they treat their own published works as universally true. So how can they be writing books and articles for everybody to read unless they believe that they are true for others? And yet they say truth is subjective. So you see the contradiction there? They're trying to claim they have a world picture, but then they're denying all other world pictures. So this is an important way to think about critiquing them. Political correctness, words become tools for power and persuasion. Behind political correctness is a notion of oppression. This is huge. This is the Marxism coming back in here. Everybody's oppressed. So women, blacks, Hispanics, homosexuals are viewed as oppressed minorities, due primarily to the influence of, guess what? Christianity. Capitalism also bringing about the need for revolution to overthrow their white, male, heterosexual, Eurocentric oppressors. So that's the primary sort of rationale behind postmodernism there. It uses a Marxist analysis of the oppressors. Of course, that means white, male, heterosexual, Eurocentric are the oppressors, and everybody else is oppressed. And we must liberate them. We must bring in maybe 50% blacks into all the airlines. We need 50% women into all parliament seats, or whatever they want. You know, it's all viewed as an oppressive structure. And what they're using now is a term called systemic racism, systemic oppression. So the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, have to do these big reviews to find out how they're oppressing their members, especially women or blacks. They need to hire more women, blacks, everything. And in the military, Greg, you know, you'd know there's the same thing, you know, going through all the command to find out that they've been oppressing women soldiers. There's big reviews of how people are treated for job promotion. So everything becomes oppression. In philosophy, multiculturalism says all societies have equally valid stories. There's no universal human principles. There's no fixed standard by which to judge other people's perspectives. Today, cultural radicals dominate the elite, especially the universities, media, and you think of the entertainment industry. Oh my goodness, you watch the Oscars or you watch some of these shows, country music awards or whatever. You know, there's definitely these entertainment elitists who are pushing their philosophical moral positions using Hollywood and using these cultural events. In ethics, you have cultural relativism. the belief that truth and morals are relative to one's culture. Morality changes, according to them, and adapts and is constantly evolving according to the dictates of the group. And this leads to the breakdown of overarching ethical values and social obligation. So you see a lot of people rioting in the streets during Trump's election campaign, burning down police stations or attacking police, violent demonstrations to attack the institutions or even certain companies to get them to force their ways upon these companies. And these companies bow and follow their dictates, whether they're supporting the environment or some LGBTQ group or whatever, or else these companies face a real backlash. Okay, in biology, postmodernism is anti-science in lots of respects. It denies the foundational premise upon which science is established, which is an objective reality, a meta-narrative that the universe had a beginning. Evolution, they say, is a social construct, like every other intellectual scheme that can be used. Now, it doesn't mean they don't believe in science. It's not a complete abandonment of science, but if you're going to be suspicious of big meta-narrative stories, you're going to be suspicious of evolution. So they in the main, they follow punctuated evolution, the idea that there's abrupt change in small populations, and neo-Darwinism, the genetic mutation, is the mechanism rather than a gradual evolution, but they are evolutionists. In psychology, the question of human nature, there's a denial of human nature. We all construct ourselves socially. The belief that one's identity is constantly changing as a result of ever-changing social factors. So that's why we have 58 genders. And one day you can be one, and the next day you could perceive yourself as a female today or a woman, and the next day perceive yourself as two-spirit or a male, and you could change back. And so how are we going to cope with this in law, where somebody is able to say that, that as a woman they were oppressed? Are they a woman, or are they a male who thinks they're a woman thanks to gender philosophy? So you get this mess in society, and man becomes a cultural being, not a natural being, not someone who is born as a male. You're shaped by culture. You are a product of culture. So this is a Marxist idea that our thoughts and who we are shaped by economic and social factors, that there's no such thing as human nature that we all have, males and females. In psychology, we can have a multiplicity of selves, not just one answer to the question, who am I? So the self has become the modern substitute for the soul. And we have to compare this to Christian psychology, which is founded on the concept that we are a soul, yes, but we have a mind and a heart, and self-identity and self-awareness. So the Christian does not replace who we are with a body, soul, and spirit with just the self. We are a trinity being. And in psychology, nihilism is the belief that life has no ultimate meaning. Sociology, again, we're looking at multiculturalism. All societies have equally valid stories. So if that's true, then we have to include all these stories in our history books. We have to have gay history. We have to have Black history now. We have to have all history books written from the point of view of oppressed white lesbians. I mean, you pick any group you want and call yourself a culture, and therefore you have equally valid stories that should be represented in textbooks. How are you going to do this in a high school or a primary school curriculum? How are you going to implement multiculturalism and try to talk about everybody's equally valid story? And one of the biggest ones is sexual egalitarianism, the belief that all sexual practices, which are based on preferences and sexual identity and not on physical characteristics, those are equal. So think about that. You know, you can't talk about LGBTQ because you're oppressing them. They have equally valid sexual preferences. It's not wrong. And if you say they're wrong, you're going to get charged with hate speech. So where are we headed to? We're headed towards pedophilia. We're headed towards polygamy. If all sexual practices are part of your identity, how are they going to be ever considered wrong or non-normal? Sociology shows where this ends up. Polymorphous sexualities, the belief that individuals can exist in more than one gender form, and nowadays we have at least 58, based on one's sexual identity and preference. So this includes gay, bisexual, lesbian, transgender, transsexual, multigender. So this is just unbelievably a distortion of a view of human nature, that there's no male, female, that's just too limited. We have 58 genders, and it's all based on your sexual preference, and they're all equal. They all need to be given full expression. So we've got the rainbow sidewalk paintings. We've got to have rainbow flags hoisted over the police station. Otherwise, you're an oppressor. You know, this stuff just rolls right through society, and in just a wave of destruction and an impossibility for society to adapt to it and implement it, because it's literally tearing down structures that are there, as these groups, especially the sexual preference groups, want to have their lifestyles validated and taught as normal. So imagine, we have to teach these and celebrate the gay lifestyle. We've got to have gay Mardi Gras. We got to have gay marches. We've got to have LGBTQ parades. And students in schools might have to go to some of these to appreciate the diversity of human beings. I mean, it becomes an ideology that you are forced to cooperate with and celebrate. If you don't celebrate it, you're not inclusive. You're not inclusive. You are hateful. So, you know, the language has changed, the laws are changed. This is an incredible impact on the Western world, on the whole world. So this is an old tape from December 2008. So back in 2008, they started recognizing all these gender possibilities. And this one here, from the Daily Telegraph, they were talking about the recognition of intersex. The persons who cannot or could not identify as either male or female would be able to choose to be identified on their birth certificate and passport as intersex. Now, the thing we have today in Canada, thanks to our Prime Minister, is he is allowing Canadians who have a baby to not put their gender on the birth certificate, male or female. So you have a baby who has a birth certificate with no identification as a male or female. So just imagine what this is going to do down the track. So what do you want this child to make up their mind if they are a boy or a girl? Yeah, that's the idea. It's taken an insidious turn. I mean, that's why we're letting men who want to identify as female or women to go into women's locker rooms, to go onto women's sports teams. Men are competing against biological women and they might even allow this in the Olympics. So it's going to destroy women's sports, because if men can be women, what are women? So this has huge implications. And so gender has become the new right. And this is from 2008. The Human Rights and Equal Opportunities Commissions, and we have them in our country, in Australia, and everywhere around the world, wants people to be able to change their gender on their passports and driving licenses, even if they don't undergo radical sexual reassignment surgery. So just imagine that. So if the police pull somebody over and they have a beard and they look like a male, you could be charged with discrimination if you don't call them by their proper name, which is female. So, I mean, there's all sorts of legal implications here. And then there's a fourth gender, but now we know there's more than four. There's actually 58. So this is from 2008. This is how far it's gone. A response to the report by the Sex and Gender Education Australia, this came from Australia, says there needs to be a fourth legal gender for people who are not even intersex. The Australian Human Rights Commission proposal does not go far enough in providing legal status and social spaces by only allowing people to be male, female, and intersex. Sorry, this is the Australian Health and Education Center. So just, this is just hugely destroying government bodies that have to decide what you are and how they should identify, how they should speak to you, and what pronouns they should use. And I mean, it's a mess. And then, of course, this was 2008. So how far have we come since then? Now they want to now a fourth gender for other. Transgender lobby groups are demanding a fourth legal gender called other for people who feel like their gender is indefinable or changes from day to day. But just imagine what that's going to do for sports teams, or for women's sports, or for joining the military, or anything. Anywhere you need to have somebody knows who you are, this means they would not be able to know. Here's, I like this because this came out of in Greg's territory. I used to live in Canberra. This is the Canberra Times, 2008. I like what the Pope said. Let's not always criticize certain denominations. The Pope defended the church's right to speak of human nature as man and woman, and ask that this order of creation be respected. Gender theory, which explores sexual orientation and gender identity, could potentially lead to the self-destruction of the human race by blurring the lines between men and women. Now, you need to say that is a fabulous statement by the Pope, 2008. Of course, the Pope today is not that Pope, but this is very accurate. We have to respect God's creation. The Bible says God made them male and female. These 58 genders are psychological creations. They are not biological. They're psychological distortions. The Pope compared behavior beyond traditional heterosexual relations as a destruction of God's work. And truly, that is what a Christian should think about this whole push. And there are some churches who've just gone right into this whole gender stuff and have accepted it. And we have to be a lot more critical thinking than that. It is a destruction of God's work to say there's not just male and female, that male and female are too narrow. We need to allow for the gender ideology where you could be anything of 58. In education, so let's look at where this worldview works itself out. In education, the purpose becomes, and I can give you a testimony of that where I work in the education area here in Canada. The purpose is to take an essentially indeterminate being and give it a social identity. And what method are they using? Language, to create a human being sensitive to its racial, sexual, and class identity. So identity is no longer based on your biological features, but your sexual preference, your class identity. And this is, again, a form of Marxism, cultural Marxism. All truth is relative. All cultures are equally deserving of respect. Interesting, except Western culture. That's my statement in yellow. All values are subjective. Okay. Although racism, sexism, classism, and homophobia are universally evil. So here's a great point for us to point out. When people say that, if everybody has their own truth, then racism, homophobia, classism, sexism can't be universal. So what are you writing about? You can only have your truth. It doesn't exist outside of your head. That's how we can start countering some of this thinking. In education, university courses begin to focus on themes of race, sex, and gender. For example, Stanford's Feminist Studies Department offers lesbian communities and identities. And last 2 sessions ago on cultural Marxism, I presented the book here. I think I'll bring it out again. A very excellent book called The Professors by David Horowitz. in which he outlines these people who are in these departments and what they do, the 101 most dangerous academics in America. So get this book and be careful when you send your child to one of these American universities and you're gonna take gender studies or feminist studies or history or sociology or anything. You're going to encounter people with postmodernist worldview. In education, Christianity is viewed with contempt and ridicule. And I can honestly say, from my experience in Australia, having graduated with 4 degrees from Australian universities, back in the 70s in Canberra, I experienced ridicule as a Christian in the department of philosophy. So the postmodernist approach to restructuring society is challenging power. So challenges to power on a day-to-day level disrupt the social system. And the arts, the themes are mainly of meaninglessness. Law becomes significant. This is a key target. Law becomes a tool for political power. All relationships are viewed as power relationships, the oppressor and the oppressed. The universal standards of legal judgment no longer exist. Which, if you think about it, how can these people say anything about the UN, Human Rights Tribunal, or the International Court, which is meant to be applying universal standards on crimes against humanity? So you can't have any universal standard of morality in this postmodernist view. So how are you able to judge something as genocide, for example, against an African dictator like Mugabe, or some crime against humanity like any other of those dictators like Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-il in Korea? So any claims to universal truth are merely a mask for gaining political power over women and minorities. So that's very frightening thought, that if you can argue that people are just wanting to get power over others and that they're say white, they're colonialists, they have white privilege, so we can't listen to you, we've got to implement equality, diversity, and inclusion in all our legal approach and documents, you are uprooting the Western legal system, which was based on biblical ideas. Critical legal studies has become huge. The deconstruction of law is used to discover its subjective meaning and its biased intent. So what we have here we are turning out lawyers who challenge the Constitution. So that here we have radical judges in the States who are not referring to the Constitution, but are radically reinterpreting it within their own subjective meaning ways, trying to say that, well, the founders or the writers of the Constitution didn't mean this, or they couldn't have meant that, or they might have meant this. They didn't write it, but hey, we think that's what it says. So this is dangerous stuff. It leads to activist judges. So the critiques of law are focused on progressive, radical political change, rather than on producing efficient government. The concentration is on race and gender issues in law, and particularly on how law creates or contributes to unequal power relations. Reality is socially constructed by the powerful, they say, to perpetrate their own hegemony or power over other people. Legal rules are indeterminate and serve only to disguise the law's white male bias. This is huge. Just think of how one very famous athlete in America, O.J. Simpson, who murdered his wife and her boyfriend, got off because they shifted the trial away from the actual murder, because I think they had his gloves and they had the murder weapon and they could trace everything to O.J. Simpson. But they managed to shift the whole trial away to a trial of racism, that this is a black man being oppressed by white police officers. So he got off. I mean, this is unbelievable. So Western law, however, grew out of Christianity and the Enlightenment, reflecting white male bias, they say. So there's no reason, no objective truth. In the West, the legal system is rooted in beliefs, the structural integrity of law, its continuity, its religious roots, transcendent qualities. So that's the facts of what we have in our system here. Today, law uses storytelling as a better way to arrive at equitable law, since it is open to multiple points of view and varied interpretations. So, for example, global warming story, the story that the world is heating up, is now used to change international law. So there's more use of emotions rather than logic in the courtroom. Politics is dominated by leftism, the left. The left is an ideological approach to politics that emphasizes the state's role in bringing about social justice, with a special focus on so-called helping the poor or those oppressed due to their race, gender, or sexual orientation. Postmodernism equates with the left. It's fueled by the failure of Marxian-inspired state socialism. So these Marxists, who never saw their perfection emerge in North Korea or China or any other Marxist country, have infiltrated the academic world, the political world, the legal world, and they're out there deconstructing and promoting social justice. Now we have to be careful with this term, social justice. The Bible doesn't use it. Social justice is really a Marxist term. I've heard it stated by another law professor that what we really want as a Christian, what the Bible endorses, is civic justice. Civic justice, justice in the operation of the civil domain. Social justice has a wide open definition that leads to people claiming, marches for social justice. And it has Marxist overtones. So the Christian supports justice. We don't need the term social in there. If you're going to use anything, it should be civic. We want justice in the civic domain, in the operational domain of our society, rather than social. For postmodernists, politics is not centered around political parties or visions. It's a tool of experimentation that involves a radical critique of the existing systems of power in a society, the identification of oppressed groups, and the remedy for bringing those groups out of oppression to achieve a sense of social justice. So just think, I'm sure as you think back of the Black Lives Matter big move, you think about some of these critical race theories, you think of some of the social movements we've had, they are coming out of this view that the oppressed and the oppressors, and everybody claims to be a victim. So victimhood is a popular tool used by people today. If you can claim that you're a victim and you deserve better, then suddenly the state must alter all of these structures because we have systemic racism or systemic oppression to liberate these so-called oppressed groups. It becomes a grab for power and money by anybody who wants to claim that they're oppressed. And that's a manipulation of truth and history. Identity politics is huge. It's a political ideology that seeks to advance the interests of particular groups in society that are perceived as victims of social injustice. I mentioned some of those already, but here we go. We have to now correct the wrongs perpetrated by Western culture, especially the puritanical USA. It's what is wrong today is white, male, European, heterosexual, Judeo-Christian. That's what is wrong. So it's easy to be critical, but there's no positive vision by these people, no positive vision in identity politics, and except for righting the perceived wrongs. And again, this book lists so many of these professors and the courses they run. And if you look at a lot of the law professors and the women's studies, the history professors, their goal is to liberate people from our oppression that we have, as white people, colonialists, as Europeans have foisted upon the world. So if you're going to study under those departments as a Christian, you better do some study about postmodernism before you go in there. And I can testify that having done 4 degrees at universities, I've sat under some departments when I did my political science master's degree in Australia in 1991, it was dominated by Marxists, dominated by communists. We had the Russian embassy send military personnel in Russian uniforms, into the University of Sydney to give lectures. And they couldn't believe that I thought the USA was a better country than Russia. And I would say, well, I don't see any satellite countries being controlled by the USA. I see many controlled by communist Russia and China in Eastern Europe, but they were completely blinded and believed that the only way we could liberate the world was get rid of the USA. You know, it was like, wow. And so we have to realize what's being taught in universities is not universal truth, but power and how to get your piece of the pie, how to get your goodies out of the system by claiming that you're a victim. So the desire is to tear down socio-political structures that are considered oppressive. International politics becomes to correct the social and political wrongs that Western civilization has perpetrated. So supposedly the West is racist nonstop. We're all racist over and over. That's all we hear. We all racist. People have never gone to Japan, where it's 99.99% Japanese. People have not gone to Indonesia, where you are, if you marry an Indonesian, I've got a Canadian friend who married an Indonesian or married a Singaporean, their kids can't have Singaporean citizenship. They're racist. Very little immigration at all to Indonesia, Thailand, Japan. You know, so the idea that racism is a white thing is ridiculous. We have the most non-racist, open civilizations on the planet. And so this idea that we constantly have to correct our own white racism is a tool of political correctness used by Marxists. And feminists, of course, want equality with men, total sexual freedom. Homosexuals are seen as oppressed by the heterosexual majority who have forced their puritanical sexual mores onto society. So we've got to liberate all these groups. They believe that white Europeans have dominated people of color for years, and now we need affirmative action, which has been developed to guarantee minorities access to higher education. Not only that, but every area of society. We have affirmative action policies in sports, in the media, in government, in education. This is to correct the supposed systemic bias and discrimination, to correct years of subservience to white oppression and affirm social justice. So we need to give people their due. We need to redistribute wealth, especially rights, special rights for minorities. You think of that, you know, some of the candidates running for the president of the United States who, I'm trying to think of his name now, the real communist fellow. Gosh, oh, I can't hear you, so I'll have to think of it later. Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders. He wants to affirm social justice for everybody and redistribute wealth. And they want to attack and tax millionaires. It's evil to be a millionaire. He wants free education, free healthcare, everything free, because we need to tax the wealthy to redistribute wealth. So that's a huge one by the Marxists. I'm just looking at my time. What I'm going to do before we get to this one, I think I'm going to stop this and we'll take some questions. Okay, we're going to just resume this here where we left off. Affirmative action, as we said, is to guarantee minorities access to higher education, and it's to correct the wrong of history, which has been subservience to white oppression. So now we have a new term, white privilege. If you're white, you're somehow privileged. Well, I guess that means if you're black in Africa, you got black privilege. I guess that means if you're Japanese in Asia, you got Asian privilege because they're the majority. This term is simply used against the West, and particularly the Judeo-Christian West, which also affirms, I think, its demonic origin. You know, the Christian must be careful to realize that not all ideas on earth have come from human minds. We also have a devil who's planted ideas even in the disciples' mind, and Jesus had to rebuke Peter. When Peter said Jesus wouldn't go to the cross, I think it's Mark 16, Jesus said, "Get behind me, Satan, but you're not setting your mind on God's interest." So Peter had a demonic idea planted in his head that would thwart God's purpose, and Jesus recognized the demonic nature of that idea. So be careful. Ideas are not all human constructions. They came from angels, and don't forget Islam and Marx both said they heard from angels, and that those angels helped them write their books. And interestingly enough, both Marxism and Islam are direct attacks upon the credibility of Christianity. So guess where they come from. All right, so politics, again, we're going to look at this. Postmodernism uses language games. So backwardness means this: you believe in the sanctity of heterosexual marriage. Same-sex marriage is broad-mindedness to the postmodernists. So we're backward. Abstinence is restrictive. Free love is a mark of liberation. Not allowing children to be taught about homosexuality is religious narrow-mindedness. It's bigotry. That's intolerance. And teaching students to embrace homosexuality as a healthy lifestyle is a mark of inclusion and tolerance. And I'm telling you, this is right in the public system where I work today. Economics, they believe in interventionism or welfare state capitalism, a combination of state-planned economy and free market. Richard Rorty, his goal is to alleviate suffering. So I just was listening to some commentaries on the media, and I think it might have been on Facebook or different posts, where they're toying with the idea of a universal basic allowance. I don't know if any of you ever heard of this. Universal basic living allowance, that rather than have unemployment insurance and sort of welfare and whatever, but everybody would be paid because they're living. So my gosh, you know, this idea of welfare state is absolutized with this. This is Bernie Sanders 100 times over. So everybody would get a living wage, whether they're working or not. So can you imagine who's going to pay for this? Who's going to give every unemployed person a full salary? And they figured out what that would be. This is absolute domination of the state in the lives of people. So in economics, all sexualities are socially and economically constructed and must be considered in any economic theory. The goals is to eliminate distinction between men and women, to eliminate patriarchal society. This again is a Marxist analysis of our society, and elevate the economies of realities of gendered subjects. So we gotta elevate now business models to address these inequalities and patriarchal oppression in society. We need to create more equitable work environments for all subjects in all fields monopolized by heterosexual males, especially in the military and the clergy. So some of you, if you could just mute yourselves, because I can't mute you all now. I'll try this. I'm hearing backgrounds. Thank you. In economics, we also have to undo the male-dominated system and the economic structure. Government must intervene to ensure economic justice is available to all. So what is economic justice anyway? Redistribution? Socialism and the state-planned economy is the answer. So there's a real problem when you have the government running things like airlines, power plants, dams, whatever. They begin to apply their political ideology that oil is evil. So we want to shut down coal mines in Australia. No more oil in Canada. We want to go green. We want to set up windmills, solar. None of this can produce anything near the power you need to run your nation. And besides, they all use oil in their construction process, whether it's a windmill or a car or a battery-powered car. I mean, the use of resources is more expensive to produce these so-called green energy than what we have today. So anyway, capitalism, they say, is male-dominated, the enemy of social justice. Well, capitalism is created the backbone of the Western world, which is had the most prosperous economies and has given away more money in aid to the poor world annually than any other worldview. So America is the largest donor of aid in the world. Canada gives away billions to these African dictatorships. Sometimes I think we shouldn't, unless we demand accountability. Why aren't these animistic cultures growing out of their poverty? Well, they have a wrong view of God. They have a wrong view of themselves. They have a wrong view of human nature. And so they harmonize with the waves and wind and trees rather than build societies that produce wealth. So it's not a social justice issue, unless there is an actual issue somewhere, which the Christian's willing to address, injustice. But we've got to be careful to describe that everybody who is poor as being a victim of capitalism. There's such a thing as laziness. There's such a thing as opportunities. There's such a thing as giftings and talents. So we got to be careful. So in economics for the postmodernists, there's no ultimate economic goal, just to correct perceived oppression. History. Historicism is the view that our past beliefs, our morals and truths can only be understood in relation to the cultural, historical periods in which they arose. So there you go, that's out with the Bible. Each historical period has its own knowledge system, and individuals are entangled within these systems. So we can't possibly understand the Egyptians at all because they had their own knowledge system. And so if we evaluate them on the basis of our society, we're acting as oppressors. So this idea then does away with objective knowledge. The postmodernists also believe that answers to life's questions cannot be found by appealing to some external truth, but only to the norms within each culture that phrase or ask the question. It's definitely anti-meta-narrative. Truth and knowledge are nothing but claims to power. They are constructions we use to try and persuade and control others. So Christianity is ultimately so evil because it's giving people a wrong picture of history, and they expect people to repent and come to a God who isn't real so that the church can have power over them. That type of story is what's going around. So what about historical research? Well, it's not an attempt to understand the past, but a propaganda tool to use in political and social power struggles. Postmodernist histories are similar to Marxist histories. They're ideological in nature. The focus is on one gender, race, or socially identifiable group in a struggle for dominion over another. So all we hear now about natives in the First Nations in Canada is that they are oppressed because of colonialism. They're downtrodden because they went to our residential schools run by a church, or the whites have somehow stolen all their resources, ruined their kids, brought disease, and these poor victims need to be liberated, and we have to indigenize our entire curriculum in the public system so that we can lift them out of their oppressed state that we brought upon them. Anybody identify with this kind of narrative? Well, that's education in the public system here today. Their history is also revisionist. They want to rewrite the past so they can serve an ideological purpose and to empower oppressed and social groups and minorities. So colonialism was absolutely evil. Should never have come over there. They had beautiful native cultures. Yeah, you know what the Canadian Indians used to do? They used to eat each other, right? The Mohawks had weapons. The Comanche, the Sioux in the US, the Huron, they all had weapons. They used to fight each other, scalp each other, eat each other. The Aborigines had weapons. Aboriginals used to fight each other, kill each other, eat each other, or pass their wives around to each other. I mean, we cannot glorify animism and say that it's produced a great civilization. Or these people, I got to say this, they would not be sitting in the dust with feathers in their hair, praying to the wind god. This is not a sign of a people who've come out of slavery to nature. And the Christian views slavery to nature, or animism, as a problem. Quit praying to the wind. And the Romans 1 says, when you go back to the creatures and worship the creatures rather than the creator, you're becoming a fool. So the Christian view is not that animism is wonderful, it's a bondage. And you should get out of it. You can still be a First Nations person in Canada, but you can love the true God. But you need to get free of your false worldview. But anyway, the status and moral legitimacy of the revisionist history come from being excluded from power. So that's the story we're going to hear. All the First Nations people have been excluded from power. We stole their land. We put pipelines through their land, da-di-da-di-da. And we have to fix everything. And we have to pay them back. We have to give them half the country. So Canada has given away half the north of the country to self-government and the natives. And yet they're receiving millions and millions and millions of dollars in state government funding, healthcare, etc. You know, people have to rise above their own poverty by taking free choices and to change their circumstance. It doesn't mean they can always change everything, but even if you're a Christian, that answer as a native can be that, you know what, you can be content and be a native and love God and not have the most wealthy life, because a lot of Christians are living in poverty in Africa and Asia. It doesn't mean we all have to be millionaires or drive a car. There's a better world ahead, according to Christianity. So not all wrongs can be righted on earth, even though the Christian certainly wants to address them. But you can't address them through the lens of postmodernism. So it generates, the last point is probably a huge one. This whole thing generates a victimhood mentality. Everybody wants to be a victim who deserves free money, free this, free that. Everybody needs to be given a job because they're Black or lesbian. Everybody needs to have the government change their policies here and there. Otherwise, we have systemic racism. I mean, that's the language going around today. And that just does not answer today's problems. So what we have in history then are these different views of history. We have feminist history, an attempt to expose a male-dominated patriarchal past and to point the way for empowering women. Some feminist historians assert that men cannot write histories of women because men have masculine ideologies and women have feminine ideologies. Same concerns writing about different races. We cannot be done because of bias. There are homosexual histories. They're put forward in response to homophobic repression to provide equality for homosexuals. So now we've got to find homosexuals who've been in the closet, and we need to find out, well, they worked in the military or the government or whatever. Now we need to rewrite all those policies to correct all the wrongs we've ever had, and we've never heard their history of Canadian politics or whatever. There are Black histories. They emphasize the past horrors of slavery to redress past maltreatment of African Americans. This stuff in America with Blacks will never go away, you know, because it's just a money pit. And it's constantly beating yourself over the head. Now, is there oppression? Yes. Against Blacks? Sometimes. Is there oppression against whites? Yes. Is there oppression against Hispanics? Sure. Look, sin is on planet Earth. But this idea that America constantly has to beat itself up over Blacks, that Blacks never feel equal, is a bunch of garbage. You've had a Black president. There are billionaire Blacks. There are some universities that only take Black Americans. 95% of the NBA are Black American basketball players making tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. Most of the baseball league are Hispanics, Latinos who come in making hundreds of millions of dollars playing baseball. I mean, yes, there's oppression, but the idea that white police only shoot Black thieves is ridiculous if you want to look at the statistics. So this Black history thing is a money pit, and everybody has to address it, or they're going to march in the street and burn down the police station because another Black guy was shot by a cop. Well, maybe he deserved it. I mean, look, cops shoot white people too. I mean, it's so this whole thing has become just way out of proportion, and it's being magnified by cultural Marxists. Then there's the native histories. Aboriginals, Eskimos, American Indians are interpreted through the lens of, oh my, colonialism. As soon as we landed here, we repressed them and brought our ways, brought our diseases, and they were such a beautiful, wonderful, advanced culture, we just destroyed it. Hey, listen, that's false. Lots of amazing things happen through spreading peoples from England over to Canada and America. The British Empire spread its truths about Christianity through its colonies and set up Australia, America, Canada, New Zealand, and 56 or 57 other countries that got incredible wealth and blessings. India, if India did not have the British, just think, they wouldn't have English, which allows them to migrate to any English-speaking country in the world. We have a lot of Indians here, and Indians, I mean from India. They got the railroad, the British put in there, gave them great economics. They got sugar, they got the biggest democracy in the world, numbers-wise. I mean, to say that colonialism ruined India is just nonsense. Now, was there negatives? Yeah, sure. But by and large, they greatly benefited. And so did Canada. Our Constitution states that we are under Almighty God. Our national anthem says, God keep our land glorious and free. So all the Western countries, by the majorities anyway, have references to Christianity in their founding documents. And that's what's produced freedom, opportunity, etc. And the proof of these civilizations is that people want to get into Canada, not out. People are trying to migrate to the States, not out. There are refugees from Africa and Muslims by the tens of thousands that are trying to get out of Islamic countries to get into Europe, London, America, Canada. So what's wrong with these worldviews that created their countries of Iraq or Saudi Arabia or Afghanistan or Pakistan or Zimbabwe or the Congo? You know, the problems of these countries must largely be seen, I believe, as their own belief system hindering them. It's Islam that hinders development in the Middle East. It's animism and their belief in the spirit world that hinders Africans in their development. Postmodernism can contribute nothing to the Western world except destruction. Marxism never helped anyone, and there isn't a Marxist country in the world that you want to live in full time, whether it's Venezuela, Russia, China, North Korea, or any of the other Marxist dominated areas. So let's not throw away our nations that have been blessed and are a great source of wealth that has been distributed and given freely to the world, and the technology that's come out of America to alleviate world suffering in food and medicine and education. You know, we can't be beating ourselves up as white people suffering from white privilege. I'm going to hit that one right over the head next time I hear it. And we have to address, of course, if there is systemic problems, but we can't use this postmodernist analysis to come up with a solution. So my conclusion then is this, that postmodernism is the philosophical proposal that reality is ultimately inaccessible by human investigation, that knowledge is a social construction, that truth claims are political power plays, and that the meaning of words is to be determined by readers, not authors. So in brief, reality is what individuals or social groups make it out to be.